I'm going to show you all the advanced role types and techniques through an example session. The legendary 4 adventurers set out on a quest to investigate the disappearance of an entire town in the Sword Coast. After trouncing many bands of roving monsters and bandits, they arrived at a settlement near Daggerford in the morning. The GM described the empty wooden houses and the dust blowing in. The only source of life were the few horses or chickens roaming about. The cleric asked for a perception check. The GM let them roll. This is the vanilla roll. All role types and techniques are based off the vanilla roll. The vanilla roll is good for simple, cut and dry scenarios such as any perception or history check. You set a DC. In this case, the GM makes it 12. If they roll past it, they succeed and learn some information. If they don't, they fail and nothing happens. The cleric rolled and passed with ease. The GM recounted how the cleric saw a temple on the perimeter of the town. While this wasn't the same god the cleric worshipped, the cleric was open to other faiths. The rogue knew something was afoot but bit their tongue. The cleric led their fellow party members to the temple. Eyes peered from stone slits, windows, and doors. They vanished back into the darkness and began locking and shutting entrances into the temple. The fighter knocked on the main doors, asking what was going on. "Leave," a raspy voice echoed from within. The entire party wanted to know if they could do some sort of check to see why they were acting so suspiciously. So the GM gave them a group insight check. A group check is used when an entire party wants to perform a task against something. There's 2 ways to run a group check: a cutoff group check and an average group check. A cutoff group check is when one success or failure can change the outcome for the entire group. In the case of group perception, the whole party succeeded the check if just one person rolls high enough. Stealth is the opposite, where one failure can mean the whole party effectively fails and alerts any guards. An averaged group check is when everyone rolls and you average the outcome of the rolls afterwards. Cutoffs where you need 1 success are very, very forgiving, and cutoffs where you only need 1 failed roll are very, very punishing. Depending on the context, average group checks are a happy medium in terms of consistency. If you do average group rolls, the people that specialize in that skill can essentially pick up the slack of people who are terrible at that skill. In this case, the GM decides that it shouldn't be free information, but they should have a high chance of succeeding the check. The GM gives the party a cutoff group roll, where only one party member needs to succeed. Everyone else fails, but the rogue passes with flying colors. The GM lets the party know that this seemed like a trained response to any outsiders. This didn't seem like a panicked decision. The fighter knocks again, declaring that if they don't start talking, then they'll have to break in. Instead of a verbal response, the fighter hears the sounds of quiet shifting from beyond the door. The fighter sighs and steps back. They charge forward and attempt to bust down the wooden door with a shoulder tackle. The GM calls for a DC 16 athletics threshold check. So threshold rolls have multiple degrees of success and failure. This idea is occasionally present in 5e, but is very prevalent in Pathfinder 2e. In the case of this door, it's DC 16. It seems like a vanilla roll, but then we add the thresholds. If the fighter beats the DC by 5 or more, the door will smash into a cultist before the start of the next fight. If the fighter fails the DC by 5 or more, the fighter takes some minor damage from the door. Threshold rolls provide more granularity to situations and, if you declare the thresholds beforehand, can make outcomes and rulings feel less arbitrary. The best case for this is during a saver suck like Polymorph. Oftentimes, these types of spells are way too binary and can be unfun to fail against. Let's say an enemy caster used a DC 16 effect similar to Polymorph against the party. If they failed by more than 5, they would suffer the normal effects of Polymorph. However, if they failed by less than 5, they would only partially transform. This wouldn't be bad as a normal Polymorph, but it's still a debuff. Now back to the session. The fighter rolls athletics and gets a 21, which is a greater success. They blow down the door and as a bonus, send it flying to one of the cultists within, dealing 4d10 damage to them. The GM describes a room full of candles and large rune circles dotting the floor. There seem to be a variety of utensils used for sacrificial offerings or rituals. From the shadows, the cultists scurry back into the dark. The party wants to give chase, and the GM calls for a skill challenge. A skill challenge is in a larger category known as a gauntlet roll. Gauntlet rolls are simply several rolls used to determine the outcome of a single event. The GM explicitly states how many failures or successes that are needed to end the gauntlet. The most common gauntlet roll that you don't think of as a gauntlet roll are death saving throws. Death saving throws are a gauntlet for a single person, 3 successes to live and 3 failures to die. Gauntlet Roles can be used in any non-combat situation, like repairing an ancient piece of arcane technology, or in this case, it's the chase where the party can use a variety of skills and have to justify each skill to the GM. The GM declares the party needs 3 successes to catch the cultists, and 3 failures for them to get away. The DC for all of these roles are DC 16. Obviously, the fighter calls for athletics as this is a competition of endurance. The GM signs off on it, and they gain their first success. The wizard attempts to use Arcana in combination with Detect Magic to maybe see the highest concentrations of magic in the area. The GM denies this roll because magic is everywhere in this area and has potential false flags. The cleric attempts religion because they have knowledge of religious architecture that may give them insight into what rooms they would hide in. The GM lets them roll, but because they roll extremely low, the party gains their first failure. The rogue tries to go for acrobatics because there's lots of cool furniture and chandeliers to maneuver around to potentially gain a speed advantage. The GM signs off on it, and due to their reliable talent feature, they automatically succeed. The fighter asks for a survival check to try and find footprints or any indication of where the cultist went. The fighter rolls and succeeds just barely. The party corners the cultists in what seems to be their main hall of worship. They begin chanting as the fighter and cleric take their first few steps in. After the rogue and wizard trickle in, each robe member douses themselves in oil. The cultists leap into a large mountain of corpses before lighting themselves aflame. From the mound of cadavers, a blood-curdling screech echoes through the worship hall. The oil, fat, and skin of the bodies congeal and merge together before bleeding red. Haunting, burnt faces scream silently on its skin. Titanic limbs made out of corrupted tissue erupt from the mound, lifting the shambling mass off the ground. The demonic giant looks around with black pits for eyes. It stares down at the party. The party draws their blades and foci as everyone rolls initiative. The creature goes first, and for its action, it spawns several masses from the main body. The rogue goes next, and the GM notes that with the rogue's passive perception, the rogue can immediately deduce that these minions are illusory. Passive rolls aren't really rolls, and more so a GM technique, but it's so important I need to mention it. Passive rolls are good when you want to have an enemy roll against one of the character's attributes in secret. However, they're also good if you want to determine if a character would automatically do something or know something without making a roll, which can speed up the game. More importantly, when you make a roll, you immediately subconsciously signal that something is wrong. Using passive investigation here rewards the rogue's investment into investigation without making it feel like a crapshoot. Several turns pass as the party attempts to dodge the Titan's attacks. The blobs of flesh attempt to damage the rogue as the party is fighting, but because he recognizes it as an illusion, it never actually harms him. Eventually, the boss misses the fighter and slams a limb down into one of the tables, splitting it in half. The fighter's turn comes. They leap over to the other side of the table and attempt to perform a jumping strike at the boss's head. The DM lets them attempt a flashy bonus roll. A bonus roll is essentially a vanilla roll with basically no risk. It's more of a technique than a unique roll. In this case, if they succeed, they get to look really cool, but if they fail, they still jump across these gaps as normal. The fighter fails their athletics checks, so they don't get to do a triple corkscrew across these gaps, but they are able to jump to the boss. The fighter's blows knock it off balance, and the cleric gets the finishing blow with Spirit Guardians. Before the demon is able to be fully exorcised, the shambling flesh flails about and causes the temple to begin to collapse. The party attempts to escape. The DM describes a myriad of obstacles standing in the way, such as collapsed bookshelves and stone foundations. The fighter attempts to barrel through. Since the fighter is at low health, the DM allows for a fail forward roll. A fail forward roll is a technique where both the failure and the success progress the narrative. This can prevent some scenarios from being arbitrary gatekeepers of session progress. In this case, if the fighter fails this check, they take damage but still break through. If the fighter succeeds, they break through without taking damage. The fighter rolls athletics and fails, taking 3d10 damage and knocking them out as they lose too much blood. The cleric casts the heal spell on them, and the party continues charging to the exit. A massive collapsed stone statue stands in the way between them and their freedom. The fighter attempts to lift the stone statue. They fail the first time and it won't budge, due to how exhausted they are. But the DM wants to milk the tension of the moment and lets the fighter push their luck. The fighter can attempt the athletics check again, but with a large risk if they fail this time. This is a push to luck roll. A push to luck roll is a good way to add more nuance and agency to a very high stakes situation. In this case, if the fighter fails, they gain 2 levels of exhaustion and they can't lift the statue. If they succeed, they still gain the 2 levels of exhaustion but are able to lift up the statue. The fighter rolls and succeeds, performing the Herculean task of lifting up tons and tons of weight for the party to escape. The best GMs know when to use each role for the best situation. You can mix and match many of these role types for great effect. Experiment with these in your next game and see what works for you. This marks the first session in the Daggerford arc and the end of the video. Like, comment about your most intense dice roll ever, and subscribe if you want to see more.